Hello guys, if you skip this video, Gukesh will lose 30 points. Wait, what if my viewers are not Gukesh fans? Never mind. In this video I'm going to show you a game of Gukesh from the Chess Olympiad in which he showed how to play with rook against light pieces. So let's begin. Gukesh was white against Suleymanli and we had Italian, but the one with bishop g5. And after h6, g5, bishop g3, black defends the pawn and white begins with c3, trying to grab space with b4 and also prepares the d4 break at some point. a5 by black, trying to stop b4. And now knight bd2. Bishop goes back to a7, a3, knight h5, and now this was a critical moment. Instead of knight h5, black should have played queen e7 and kept an eye on e5 square. But after knight h5, things became spicier because Gukesh took on e5. And now if you take back on e5, knight on h5 hangs. So black took on g3. But now white has this bishop f7 intermediate move. King goes to f8 and now knight g6. White is gonna take a rook on h8. So after king f7, white would take on h8, take and open up the h-file, and then go queen h5, castle queenside, f4. It would be quite dangerous for black because of this massive pawn chain in the center. Pawn chain or pawn mass? Maybe pawn mass. So black chose king g7 because on knight takes, rook hangs on h1. So you have to do something else as white. You have to capture on g3. But how do you capture? If you take with the h-pawn, now the rook goes to h7 and now this bishop is in trouble. Bishop and knight are connected to each other, so if the bishop moves, knight hangs. So you would have to go queen f3, but black has some interesting options like g4 and knight e5 attacking the bishop. So white more or less has to take, and now he has to give up this bishop. And things become quite difficult. White is still better because he has all of the pawns. He kept all of the pawns. He has 3 pawns for a piece, but black has a bishop pair, so it's kind of balanced. So Gukesh chose correct approach, fg. And now the point is, if you go rook h7, there's gonna be rook f1 defending this bishop. And now the queen can get to h5 and you can extract the bishop from f7 and be 2 pawns up. So Suleymanli chose to just capture the bishop, Gukesh took, queen h8, and now it's time to put the king into safety zone. But how do you do it? Gukesh does it in a way that's very clever. He goes d4, covers the bishop, and he's ready to castle with check and put his king to h1 later. So king g7 by black, castle, bishop d7, and now king h1. So now this king on h1 is tucked in very nicely, not really in any danger, and now the f-file has to be exploited. We have this material imbalance in which white has 2 pawns and a rook, and black has 2 light pieces, 2 bishops for a rook. But right now these pieces, they often need some outposts. Like it would be ideal if somehow white would play d5 and knight can get to e5, but in this case these light pieces are quite nicely limited by the pawns. If there was one small detail like this d pawn not existing, knight e5 would bring black much better position because bishop is becoming more active, knight on e5 is unbothered, and things change drastically. But this way, with the pawn center as it is, d4, e4, it really limits black's options. So black tries to exchange a pair of rooks to just decrease attacking potential, but white just plays queen e2. Black takes, and even though black exchanged a pair of rooks, the problems don't go away for black. He still has to cover some entry squares like f6 and f7. Knight can maybe become more active by getting to e3 and f5 or d5. In the meanwhile, black's pieces are not really fully used. So black is trying to reposition his queen to at least get to e7 to cover both squares f6 and f7 as I mentioned before. Gukesh doubles the heavy pieces, queen e7, and now the knight improves, knight c4. And black uses a small tactic to play bishop e6. First glance, it seemed like he blundered a piece by d5, but that will lead to bishop g8, and now e5 square is available to the knight. But Gukesh doesn't fall for this, he goes back to e3. Now knight goes to d8, simply knight has to find a better square for itself. And now white does a very smart thing. Black is prepared for some defending on f7, f6 and so on, but he's not really ready for change of structure. So white changes structure by knight f5, forcing the trade, and now e takes f5. He's closing the f file but opening up a new one for which black is not equipped yet. Knight on d8 doesn't really cover any entry squares like e8, e7. Black is blocking against f6 by queen f6. And now rook e1. Things are becoming very difficult for black. Now it's much tougher to defend against entries on e8 and e7, as I told before. Black played bishop b6, trying to involve his bishop via this diagonal once he pushes the c-pawn. So after g4, the f-pawn is protected, so the queen is free to go. Black goes c5, but now white blocks it. And now a very important thing is that to not allow the knight to get to e5 somehow. Right now it's not possible to get to e5 without any big consequences, because rook e6 comes, and on queen d8 you might just go queen h3 and get from this side. h6 has to be defended, so it's very tough to defend this position. So black tries with c4, and now white plays rook e4. Now, don't mistaken this that white wants to capture on c4. Black played bishop c5, and now this pawn is not good to take, because knight f7, knight e5, black would get enough play to survive this. Because knight gets to e5, the e file is blocked, which is currently the only open file, and suddenly black's pieces come to life. Gukesh doesn't rush, he goes a4, fixing this weakness, disconnecting from the b pawn potentially. So bishop a7 back by black, but now queen e2, threatening rook e7. And now comes h5. A pretty desperate attempt, but something had to be done. Now rook e7 by white, king f8, check, king f7, and now he takes on h5. After which black tried with g4 as well, but now the h-pawn runs. You cannot take it because of checkmate on e7. So black took on f5. Now comes the h-pawn, and still you cannot capture it because of the skewer. So black gives a check, white covers, and now the h-pawn promotes, so black had to capture, but now black resigned because if he goes to g7, there's gonna be h8 queen, luring the king on the back rank, and now rook e8, take on d8 and be an exchange up. So why did this work so well for white? It worked well because bishops were not so active. Knight on c6 didn't have a very decent spot. For example, if things changed, black would have much more threats like knight g4 and knight f2. But in this case, with knight on c6, knight being so limited by opponent's pawns, it simply didn't have enough space to create some dynamic play. White had all the control. He changed the structure in some moment with forcing the exchange of knight for a bishop. And even in this case, not being able to control the entry squares was maybe the key. If somehow black would put his bishop on f6 and this knight on g7, he would be able to control all these squares very successfully. And it would make it easier for the queen to become more active and to cause some damage to white's queen side, maybe to just distract white from the e-file. But in the game, black had to block the pawn with the queen, which is not a great job for such a strong piece. White had all the time in the world to regroup, to put his heavy pieces on the e-file. Queen was still busy by blocking this f-pawn, but e7 and e8 were not defended well, so black had plenty of trouble here. He tried to untangle with h5, but it didn't bring any relief, so rook e7 was played, and we saw what happened later. If he didn't play h5, white would simply take on c4 and bridge via 7th rank. So it wasn't really an option for black to do something else c4 was hanging, so after h5 you saw what happened. The h-pawn became a new asset of white, and it decided the game. So what is the blueprint for playing with rook against minor pieces? First of all, you should be very careful about the pawn play. Let's say, for example, you move this pawn. You instantly improve 2 pieces. The bishop on a7 becomes more active, his scope becomes much bigger, and knight from c6 gets to e5 to a perfect square. Second thing is, you want to invade on an open file. You want to open up some files. You don't want the rooks to be trapped in semi-open files and closed files for so long. You want to open up these files as soon as possible to make the rooks work. Try to invade onto some squares, like in this case f6, f7, on the opponent's half. So see you soon. Bye.